Content warning. This audiobook contains strong language, sexual themes, supernatural elements, and graphic depictions of death. The author recommends this work for audiences aged 18 and over. If you let your 6-year-old listen, that's on you. Dark Matter, The Order of the Hidden Cross, by Ian Bailey, published by Ashlar Press. Copyright 2025. Chapter 12. The Oath. The day they took their oath, the bells of the Vatican tolled loud and clear, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that would come to define their lives. Paolo and Francesco stood side by side in the grand hall, surrounded by towering marble pillars and gilded frescoes that depicted scenes of divine grace and glory. The ceremonial robes they wore were spotless, pure white trimmed with crimson, a sign of the duty they were about to take on. Their faces were tense, their eyes filled with the uncertain fire of men who knew they were entering into something much larger than themselves. Cardinal Gianni stood before them, draped in gold-embroidered robes, his eyes hard and distant. He towered over them both, a figure who seemed to have no use for compassion. At the altar he held the ancient tome, the Codex Illuminatus, its worn leather cover engraved with symbols older than Rome itself. "Today you become members of the Order of the Hidden Cross," Gianni intoned, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall. The words carried a cold finality, like the closing of a door that would never open again. As such, you take on a burden far heavier than any clergyman has ever known. Francesco's heart raced, though he kept his face impassive. He'd heard tales whispered late at night about what the order truly guarded, but no one ever spoke of it openly. Once you took the oath, there was no way out. Paolo's hands twitched at his side, betraying his nerves. Francesco glanced at him, their eyes meeting briefly. He could see the unease there, the apprehension. They were about to pledge their lives to a shadow they could only glimpse through stories and half-truths. "Repeat after me," Cardinal Gianni continued, opening the codex. "I swear to protect the sanctity of the Church, to guard its secrets with my life, to serve the order, and to keep my silence." Paolo's voice wavered as he repeated the words, a strained whisper. Francesco followed, the weight of the words feeling like chains wrapping around him, binding him to something unseen. Gianni's gaze bore into them. "And do you swear to give your lives in service to the order, to protect the faith so that this abomination never sees the light of day?" Both men nodded, the affirmation leaving a bitter taste in their mouths. "I swear," they said in unison. Gianni raised his hand in blessing. "Then rise as guards of the order. From this day on, your lives are not your own. You belong to the order, to the secret it keeps. And remember this: question nothing, speak of nothing, doubt nothing." The words settled over them like a shroud. Paolo swallowed hard, and Francesco reached out to steady him, feeling the slight tremor in his arm. Neither man spoke. They just followed Gianni through twisting hallways, deeper underground, until the grandeur of the Vatican was replaced by stark stone walls and lightless passageways. "Where are we going?" Paolo whispered, his voice tight with fear. Francesco shook his head, keeping his gaze forward. He didn't know, and part of him didn't want to. The air grew colder as they descended, and with each step the atmosphere grew heavier, pressing in on them like an unseen weight. Finally, they reached a door, an iron door covered in symbols neither of them recognized, sealed with heavy chains that seemed to vibrate with unnatural energy. "This is your charge," Gianni said. "What is behind this door is not just any threat. It is the Church's greatest danger, a being so profound that even speaking of him would condemn you to death. Do not pity him. Do not listen to him. And whatever doubts plague you, you will keep him contained. In the flickering candlelight, their white robes brushed against the cold stone floor, the air heavy with the scent of incense and the deeper, earthy odor of ancient, damp stone. Francesco stood tense, his eyes locked on the iron door, the door that led to the secret chamber where the church's darkest truth was kept, the one they were sworn to guard with their lives. He could feel the pulse, deep and unrelenting, coming from the other side. It was like a heartbeat, rhythmic and sinister, thrumming in time with his own. He swallowed his dread but felt the cold sweat beading on his neck. Yet it wasn't just a pulse. It felt like a shiver in the walls, a creeping sensation that crawled across the skin. And when Francesco squinted at the symbols on the iron door, he could almost swear they shifted in the candlelight, as if they were trying to break free from the metal. It left an impression that something alive and very old coiled around the chamber, tightening its grip. But he believed it was the prisoner's doing. The chamber was suffocating in its stillness. The air felt ancient, heavy with secrets older than the stones themselves. Dim candlelight flickered against the carved sigils etched into the walls, their looping shapes twisting in ways the eye couldn't quite follow. Paolo stood beside Francesco, their robes still crisp and uncreased from the ceremony that had just bound them to the Order of the Hidden Cross. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, sacred in a way neither of them could describe. Paolo's breath was slow, deliberate, as if he were afraid to disturb something lurking in the shadows. Francesco's eyes darted across the room, flickering from symbol to symbol, as though searching for some hidden pattern or answer in their shapes. Both men felt it, the weight, the watchfulness of something unseen. The purpose of the chamber, the thing they were now sworn to guard, pulsed faintly at the edges of their senses. Whatever it was awake. Months had passed since that day, though neither Paolo nor Francesco could say exactly how long. Time didn't behave normally in the chamber. It folded, stretched, and frayed at the edges until days bled into nights and back again. They had fallen into a routine, if one could call it that. Prayers whispered in tones barely above silence, rituals performed with trembling hands, and long hours spent staring into the middle distance, listening for something they couldn't quite name. Paolo's once clean robe was stained now, its edges worn and frayed. Francesco had grown thinner, his sharp cheekbones casting shadows of their own in the dim light. The solemnity of their duty had become a leaden chain around both their necks, dragging them down inch by inch. Paolo shifted beside Francesco, restless. He felt it too. They both did, though neither had spoken about it. Not until now. The silence pressed down on them, thick and unyielding, making the air feel like water in their lungs. "You feel it, don't you?" Paolo's voice broke the stillness, low and sharp, slicing through the oppressive quiet. His arms were wrapped tightly across his chest, as if he could shield himself from the chill that had settled in his bones, though the chamber was far from cold. Francesco didn't answer right away. He just stared into the center of the chamber, the place they had been told never to look for too long, lest it look back. When he finally spoke, his voice was a rasp, thin and cracked from too many sleepless nights. "Every day, Paolo. I feel it every day." The words hung between them, fragile and trembling, like glass suspended by a thread. And for the first time since their initiation, Paolo realized they weren't just guarding something. They were trapped with it. Paolo's gaze locked on the iron door, his unease written in every crease of his brow. "He's pushing again, isn't he? Trying to reach us." His voice trembled, each word heavy with dread, and his eyes flicked to the shadows as though they might rise and swallow him whole. Francesco let out a slow, controlled breath, trying to regain composure. "He's always trying," he replied, voice tight. "The drugs. They're not enough, not anymore." Paolo hesitated. Then why don't we report it? Tell the order that something's wrong? Francesco turned sharply. You know why, he hissed. We swore an oath to the Order of the Hidden Cross. We guard this secret with our lives, no matter what. Do you want them to come for us? For you? Paolo's lips tightened, but he didn't back down. But what if they lied to us? He whispered, voice trembling. What if he's not what they say? What if we've been guarding something, someone else? He lowered his voice further, almost as if speaking to the darkness itself. Sometimes I swear I hear words, not whispers, more like cries, but not in any language I've heard. Francesco felt a cold knot in his stomach. He buried these same thoughts deep, too afraid to voice them. But something about the symbols on the door made him uneasy, something in the way they pulsed, like veins carrying some dark energy. Still, he believed that it was the prisoner creating this terror. He is what they say he is, Francesco insisted, voice low and firm, though a slight waver betrayed his doubt. A danger to everything, to the church, to the world. But even as he spoke, the pulse seemed to grow louder, insistent. It felt like something clawing, begging to be freed. But was it a plea for freedom or a demand from the dark incantations themselves? Paolo's brow furrowed deeper. But what if they were wrong? Francesco swallowed, his mouth dry. We're not wrong, he replied, though the words felt hollow. He's been in there for thousands of years. If he weren't dangerous, they wouldn't have kept him locked up all this time. I've had dreams, Paolo confessed quietly. Dreams about him. Francesco's heart skipped a beat. He'd had the dreams too. Forbidden dreams. The order demanded silence about everything, but the dreams were growing stronger. A voice like a mournful sigh echoed through the stone halls, a voice pleading for release. What dreams? Francesco asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He wondered if the incantations around the iron door were the source of those dreams, warping their minds to believe the prisoner's intentions were sinister. He's calling to me, like he's in pain, and he's asking me to find someone, Paolo's voice trembled. He keeps saying the same name. Look for Father Filadelfo. But I don't know why. I just know he's trapped, and I'm the one holding the chains. Francesco felt a chill crawl up his spine. He'd heard that name too. The name haunted the edges of his consciousness like a ghost. It's the drugs, Francesco whispered, more to himself than to Paolo. We've been down here too long. It messes with your head. Paolo shook his head, his face pale. What if it's not the drugs? What if he's not supposed to be sedated? What if we're keeping him from what he's meant to do? Enough! Francesco snapped, voice too loud in the oppressive space. Do you want to disappear like the others? Do you want to be erased because you're asking too many questions? Paolo flinched but didn't look away. I know what I'm risking by asking, but it doesn't change what I've seen, what I've felt. His voice trembled. I've seen him, Francesco. He's not a monster. He's broken, and he's trying to reach us. Francesco's heart pounded harder, his skin clammy with sweat. He could feel it too, the pull, that faint connection. But was it to the prisoner, or to the dark spells that imprisoned him? The pulse behind the door grew louder, like a heartbeat in the silence, slow and deliberate. And then it happened. An alarm, shrill, piercing, echoed through the stone corridors. Francesco's heart stopped. A loud, mechanical whirring filled the chamber, the flickering lights dimming to a dull red. No, Paolo whispered, eyes wide with terror. No, not again. The air vents hissed, releasing a thin mist that began to creep into the room, pouring into the chamber beyond the iron door. A potent sedative designed to force the figure into submission. Francesco stood frozen, blood running cold as the alarms blared. He heard movement, something thrashing behind the door, sending chills down his spine. The shadows seemed to dance with the noise, but whether they were a sign of the prisoner's struggle or the enchantments themselves, Francesco could no longer tell. And then, silence. The thrashing stopped. The air went still. The alarms faded, but the hiss of gas lingered, seeping into every corner of the chamber. For a moment, Francesco thought he heard something behind the door, a faint, guttural cry that froze his blood, before silence fell like a crushing weight. "He's sedated," Francesco whispered, though he didn't know if he was reassuring Paolo or himself. "He's back under." Paolo stood beside him, shaking, drenched in sweat. His eyes were distant, staring through the iron door, lost in the darkness beyond. "For now," he muttered, "but it's only a matter of time." Francesco stared at the door, his hands trembling beneath his robe, but then his gaze shifted to Paolo, who still stood rooted to the spot, his face pale and drawn. It wasn't the first time Paolo had spoken out, voiced questions he shouldn't, doubted what should never be doubted. But tonight there was something different in his voice, an edge, a resolve, a quiet defiance that hadn't been there before, and that frightened Francesco far more than the pulse behind the door. "Whatever you're thinking," Francesco said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Forget it. Don't do anything. Stupid." Paolo's eyes flickered toward him, but he said nothing. He just stared back at the iron door, his jaw clenched tight, his breath coming out in shallow gasps. Francesco could almost see the thoughts turning behind his eyes, the questions, the fears, and the burning, reckless urge to pull back the veil, to understand what the order had hidden for so long. A dangerous urge, a fatal one. "Promise me," Francesco pressed, stepping closer, his voice urgent. "Swear to me you won't say a word about this, to anyone. You know what they do to those who talk." Paolo's expression hardened, and for a moment Francesco thought he would argue and lash out. But instead, Paolo merely nodded, his face blank, a mask of forced calm. "I won't talk," he said quietly. But the words felt hollow, like they had already fallen away into a lie, and Francesco knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. A feeling settled in Francesco's gut, a heavy, suffocating certainty that Paolo would not let it go. He could see it in the way Paolo's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, in the restless flicker of his eyes. A man on the edge of a decision that could not be undone, a man teetering between silence and rebellion. And for a brief, terrible moment, Francesco thought he saw a shadow shift, not on the iron door, but on Paolo himself, like a warning, as if the darkness had reached out to claim him already, whispering his fate. Francesco turned away, staring back at the iron door. The pulse had stopped, but it would start again. It always did. And the next time, the spells might not hold. Beside him, Paolo remained silent, still staring into the shadows, where secrets lurked and dreams twisted into nightmares. But Francesco knew the silence would not last. He could already feel Paolo's resolve hardening, his questions taking root in the darkness. And somewhere deep within, Francesco felt an ache, a mournful certainty that the next pulse, when it came, would not just shake the chamber but tear them apart, that one of them would break, and only one would be left standing. It was only a matter of time, and time, it seemed, was running out. This chapter may have ended, but the story doesn't. Return next Monday for what waits in the dark. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and leave a comment to share what the shadows may have whispered to you.